This Fed Gov Today program is sponsored by Maximus. On this edition of Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose, a transformation in progress for the Pentagon's weapons tester, the next generation of customer experience in government, and the future of identity management could start at birth. Welcome to Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose. The Office of the Director of Operational Test and Evaluation at the Defense Department says it's, quote, pioneering a new future for T&E. It's listing 5 elements that will drive that new future. Dr. Doug Schmidt is Director of OT&E at DoD. Doug, welcome. It's great to talk to you. What caused you and your team to think about modernization in your office?
Francis, several things motivated those changes and focus on modernization. First, the rapid pace of threats that we deal with in the world today is changing, and it's much more problematic, a much trickier environment in which to work, so we knew we had to be able to address those threats that the DoD needs to. Secondly, our systems to address those threats have become much more complex and much more interconnected and integrated. And therefore, we had to make sure that our technologies for testing and evaluation were keeping a pace with the development of more complex systems. And I think another thing to note is that the technologies themselves are becoming much more sophisticated. So, for example, AI is becoming a big issue. And so making sure we have the means to be able to evaluate systems that are built to be AI-enabled, as well as to be able to use appropriate AI in our testing processes, methods, and tools are also very important.
We talked a little bit before we went on the air that although you and I have not met before, I know your predecessor in the office, Nick Girton, very well. So I know that these 5 things are not things that the office hadn't done before. So I'm curious, as we talk through them, about the modernization component for that. You mentioned test the way we fight. What does that mean in the context of both testing and then delivering capabilities to the warfighter?
Because our potential adversaries, our near-peer competitors, have a lot more people and a lot more resources than we do, we have to be smarter about the way in which we build our modernization and modernize our weapon systems. And therefore, we also have to make sure that we have the appropriate tools and technologies to test systems the way we fight. And increasingly, the way we fight is going to be joint, collaborative with our allies, combined, and it's going to also be an all-domain environment. We're going to have joint forces from the Army and Navy and the Air Force and other services trading tracks and queuing and tipping each other about where the adversaries are located. And so it's important that we test our systems in a similar way, so that when we get out into the fight, if we get into the fight, we're able to make sure our weapon systems work the way we expect them to and not have uncertainty or non-determinism creep into the equation.
I imagine that means that then a lot of the testing that you're doing now involves data, information technology, and so on at a level that it never did before.
Absolutely. There's still, of course, many challenges in the hardware area. There's directed energy, there are hypersonics, there's electromagnetic spectrum. But some of the problems that we've seen and the challenges we've seen for decades now have really related more to the software side of the house, software in general, software-reliant systems, cybersecurity, and again, increasingly, the use of artificial intelligence.
What's the interaction that you have with the software factories and the other organizations that are delivering those kinds of capabilities to the services individually and to the joint force?
Incredibly important. So in the operational testing community, we typically are at the end of the process or near the end of the process. And if we don't have systems that are well tested through the use of software factories, automation, continuous integration, continuous deployment pipelines, DevSecOps, and so on, the types of problems that we run into when we get to operational testing are going to be magnified. And in fact, what we find often today is we discover problems in operational testing that really should have been caught during the developmental phases. So having automation, having all the technologies you just mentioned, crucially important to try to address those issues and remediate them before we get towards the end, when there's often not enough time, not enough budget, not enough runway to be able to make a big difference.
I remember when the F-35 first was proposed and development began, someone in the Air Force at the time called it a piece of software that flies, and I imagine that software factories have become really critical and valuable in the fact that they can be agile and nimble and deliver capabilities on an ongoing basis to do the kinds of things that you just described.
Absolutely, and what makes any system as complex as the F-35 is these systems don't fly in isolation, they fly as parts of other squadrons or other units. And so it's important that we test not just the platform itself, but also the way it integrates with its sensors that it has on board, as well as communicate with other parts of the squadron or the air wing it happens to be flying with.
The other 4 pillars of this are accelerating the delivery of weapons that work, improving the survivability of DoD in a contested environment, pioneering T&E of weapon systems built to change over time, and fostering an agile and enduring T&E enterprise workforce. We'll talk about the workforce, and people can read about the others through a link on our show page. But I wanted to ask you about accelerating the delivery of weapons that work. I was not surprised to see a reference to speed in this. What are the services telling you they need you to do speed-wise to meet their needs on the battlefield?
Well, as you can imagine nowadays with the accelerated threat densities and the threat evolutions, it's important for us to be able to get our systems to the field more rapidly than ever before. However, we want to make sure that by the time that the systems get to the field, they've been properly evaluated, and so we can provide a realistic assessment that allows decision makers, be it the Congress or be it the Defense Department or war planners, even combatant commanders, the ability to make risk-prudent decisions. And we are crucially important in that regard. And that particular pillar really deals with data. The DOT&E has an enormous amount of data about the systems that we test. In fact, we probably know more about the system's readiness and health and status than almost anybody in the DoD. And making a way to have that data usable by decision makers at the right time, under the right circumstances, is crucial. And it's really part of what our value proposition has become. We're not just about writing an annual report that summarizes for Congress or the news media how our systems perform, but we really want to make that data available in more real time so people can trust it and make hard decisions based on weapon target pairing and other capabilities that will get us to the fight faster and more reliably.
Yes, and that I was thinking about that as one of your jobs sometimes as you're describing that. Because you have that data, sometimes it's your job, your office's job, to deliver bad news to either the services, to Congress, or to the general public about a system. What does that look like in the kind of environment that we're in now, given the threats that we're up against?
Well, one of the challenges, as you can imagine, is we really don't have the luxury of being able to wait decades to get our execute weapon systems fielded and tested in their entirety. So we have to be able to do this quickly. We have to be a lot more agile. And one of the key points here is that we don't work in isolation. The Director of Operational Test and Evaluation Office is really part of a team sport. We can't test our way to success by ourselves. We have to work with other parts of the DoD, Office of Secretary of Defense, the research and engineering side, the acquisition and sustainment side, as well as the services, in order to make sure that what gets fielded is going to work operationally, and people will feel confident. The warfighters and combatant commanders will feel confident when they use those systems in harm's way.
The last item that I mentioned is fostering an agile and enduring T&E enterprise workforce. How is your workforce changing given the changing threat landscape that you described earlier, the different ways that you're testing now that you didn't before, or that you didn't do as much of before, and so on?
Well, you alluded to this earlier about the F-35 being software that flies. The modern DoD is really about software-enabled systems. And so one of the things our workforce has to continually refresh themselves on are what techniques, methods, and tools and so on are important to test these kinds of systems effectively. And of course, other parts of the enterprise have to worry about how to architect and develop those systems. So this is something that requires constant attention. As you can imagine, the world of software is rapidly changing. There's a quote from the Defense Science Board that software is never done. And one of the consequences of that is testing is really never done either. So we need to move beyond a world where we just take snapshots of systems at a particular point in time and then test them to an inch of its life, to something where we're testing things more continuously, and that's again where software factories come into play. But having our workforce understand cyber issues, red teams, doing penetration testing, having our workforce understand how to leverage generative AI, for example, crucially important to be able to meet our mission needs now and in the foreseeable future.
We have less than a minute left, Doug. How will you judge either this strategy in particular or more broadly your efforts as you lead this office to make sure that you're achieving the things that you want to achieve?
So one of the crucial issues here is to be able to make sure that the problems that we identify when we get to operational testing are hopefully as minor as they can be, and that's because we, together with our brethren and our siblings who are in other parts of the enterprise, have done due diligence on earlier phases of the testing and evaluation life cycle. So making sure that we have good developmental testing, good contractor testing, automated testing, that is going to be crucially important, because we don't want to have the situation where we have very important weapon systems that are very expensive and very effective when used properly, when tested properly, fail to work because we haven't done our job.
Doug, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks very much for your time today.
Thanks very much, Francis. Appreciate it.
You can find a link to the OT&E transformation plan on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, the next generation of government customer experience. Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. Here's Alex Martinez, Director of Solutions Architecture Worldwide Public Sector Partners at AWS from the Carasoft Artificial Intelligence for Government Summit.
And so how do we create engines to be able to do this sort of cloud adoption? Now we have, AI adoption within our cloud adoption framework. And so how do we get that engine going very fast? And that means building the agility and the culture to be able to create experimentation. And so again, you're able to take advantage of the technology here because you can, go build tests that allow you to feel confident to move faster than you had in the past.
For more, go to innovationingov.com. Welcome back. This week is the 6-month anniversary of the White House Executive Order on Customer Experience. Agency CX leaders say some of their most important partnerships inside agencies are their technology counterparts. Mike Raker is Chief Technology Officer at Maximus. Mike, welcome. Thanks for joining me. What do you mean when you talk about the next generation of customer experience in government?
Yeah, I think if you look at the executive order and other things that are going on, it's really about how do we make sure we maximize the engagement with our citizens, right? Government is in place to serve citizens, so in all aspects of providing those services, how do we make sure that we can deliver the services that they need in the technology that they want for whatever's necessary.
What are some of the technology is some of the technology that agency CX people are relying on those tech counterparts across agencies to really do their jobs?
Sure, yeah, good question. If you look in the past, most of the engagement has been through traditional means, right? Phone calls, emails, web, and the like. And we're transitioning to how do you think about all multimodal methods of engagement? So social media, text, anything that we use in our personal lives to communicate and exchange information with commercial companies is what the government's bringing to citizen-enabled services.
What should government professionals understand about that transition of commercial technology to their usages that maybe they haven't had a chance to wrap their arms around yet?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think one, the technology is there because we use it in our personal lives, right? But I think it's also about the adaptation to what's unique about the government space that we may not do in our commercial lives, right? So how do we make sure we extend to the maximum edge so that we can have the accessibility options that are necessary in that space? What are the unique policy and other aspects that a government organization has to enable and deal with that maybe a commercial entity can make different choices around? And so I think that's where the industry and the government partnership is really about having those conversations and making sure we can transition the technology that we use in our everyday lives into how we use them to have the government better serve its citizens.
A lot of CX people that I talk to across agencies are talking about particular pieces of technology and maybe aligning them to their mission rather than the reverse. Is there a risk in that in your view? Or I understand the desire to think about emerging technologies, and I think that's probably wise, but it strikes me that there's a chicken and egg problem there potentially.
There always is, right? As technology continues to accelerate and move forward, we want to use it in different ways, but we always have to think back in my mind to what's the outcome we're trying to deliver, right? What is the set of use cases, and how do I deliver that service to the citizens of the United States? And then how is technology an enabler to do it better, faster, cheaper, reach more people, have a better outcome for what we do? And I think if we always keep that in mind as a government industry partnership, we'll be well served in the application of that technology.
How much of the transition to what you're describing is going to be traditional change management type things, and how much of it's going to be adapting to these new technologies that agencies will be using for the first time or using at scale for the first time?
It has to be an equal part of both, right? So I think we've all seen in our personal lives, as new technology comes along, we have to understand how to use them, right? And so there's an educational component of that. There are feedback loops to make sure that as that technology is applied into new areas, that we're effective communicators of this is how you use that technology. In some cases, as Mr. Schmidt had said, as AI starts to come in, how not to use that technology, right? So the change management process, both internal to the government and then outreach to citizens, is a critical part of making sure that that technology can truly achieve the goal that it needs to achieve.
You mentioned some of the building blocks, the AI, the chatbots, and text, and so on. Does one measure the results the same way for those kinds of technologies that one does through the more traditional means?
You know, I think on one hand, yes, right, because we still want to make sure that the end outcome that we're delivering to citizens is the same, right? Did they get the service? Did they get it on time? Did they were they served well by the overall organization that was with it? I think there are some additional measures that we need to think about in terms of those technologies, particularly as we start to look at AI-enabled services and the ways that we're using them to make sure that they are truly delivering the outcomes they want, and we can measure things like, hey, is the AI and the models, are they drifting? Are they really truly giving us the feedback that we want? But always to that ultimate goal of making sure that the outcomes that are intended to the service are being delivered as the ultimate measure of success.
Mike, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks very much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
You can read more about customer experience in the federal government on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, the future of identity management could start at birth. Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. Don't miss the latest episode of Innovation in Government. You'll get exclusive insights from the Artificial Intelligence for Government Summit presented by Carasoft. Discover how AI is revolutionizing government operations. You'll meet leaders from the Department of Homeland Security, the Labor Department, and the Commerce Department, telling you what they're doing now and what's coming next for AI in government. Innovation in Government, on demand now at innovationingov.com. Digital technology people use every day that doesn't have anything to do with the federal government could be a potential solution for a critical Department of Homeland Security problem. That solution could help several components inside DHS serve their customers better. Will Graves is Deputy Assistant Director for Futures Identity in the Office of Biometric Identity Management at DHS. Will, welcome. It's good to have you on the program. Your team wrote recently, OBIM Futures Identity is currently working to understand changes in facial progression over the course of several decades, including early in life. Why are you studying that, and how are you going about studying it?
Certainly. So CBP is currently taking photographs and fingerprints of people coming into the country between the ages of 14 and 79, right? And so they're looking at getting rid of that age range, and so we're looking at it from a scientific view of, you know, if you're going to get rid of that age range, how good is facial recognition how long is it valid? So let's say if you're 5 years old and you come into the country, and the next time you come in, you're 7 years old. Is that facial photograph that we have enrolled from 5 years old good enough for facial recognition to identify you at 7? And so what we're trying to do is create data sets so we can scientifically figure out how long that facial images are good for, and then we can actually influence policy on how long those images are valid, right? How long do we need to keep those? So the retention policies as well, because what we don't want to do is over-enroll or under-enroll, right? We're trying to get that sweet spot of, you know, doing things that make sense for CBP.
I imagine there are technological advantages that you have now that make this possible, or more possible than maybe it would have been 5, 10, 15 years ago. What are some of those technological advantages that underpin the work that you're doing now, Will?
Certainly. So, you know, everybody talks about AI, right? And so all the algorithms that facial recognition we use now are based on AI. Now, we train the AI algorithm, and then once it comes to the government, we actually don't have AI actually training on those. We're just taking the trained algorithm. So we're not exposing all the government's data to, you know, the commercial vendors who are actually providing those things. So much better. You know, in DOD, in 13, when I was the chief biometrics engineer there, 75% was a good face match, right? And now you can look at some of the NIST reports, and they're in the high 90s, right? So facial recognition is growing by leaps and bounds. Like a 6-year-old algorithm nowadays, it would, you know, if you were number one 6 months ago and you didn't change your algorithm, you'd fall out of the top 50. That's
Amazing.
how fast these algorithms are improving.
We'll talk about that more later in the conversation if we have time, but the technology I was alluding to at the beginning of the conversation that you're using is just the fact that we all walk around with cameras in our pockets now, and digital imaging exists for people of all ages that didn't exist not too long ago. How are you leveraging technology like that to be able to build the data set that you talked about?
Yeah, so we're partnering with a few labs, Johns Hopkins University and S&T and Clarkson University, who has for the past 10 years been collecting photos of individuals, right? And so as the younger, when I was growing up, you had the old Kodak film cameras, right? So there are very few pictures.
Polaroids.
Yes, very few pictures of myself, but I've got I've got 3 kids, all under the age of 30, and we have pictures, like tons and tons and tons of pictures, all digital. So you can ask people who are under 30, right? Hey, can you give me a picture when you're 6 months, when you're 8 months, when you're 2 years, 5 years, and you can actually build a data set because there's all those photographs are available, as opposed to when I was growing up.
When we talked about this before we went on the air, you mentioned the importance of having a diversity in the data set.
That's correct.
What is important about that? Why is it important? And how do you go about obtaining that diversity of imagery in that data set?
So facial recognition has gotten a really bad rap. In 2018, there was a study that said, there's a bias, and it's statistical bias, right? It's not, I always say math isn't racist, right? But so when these algorithms are trained, they're usually trained on the data that's available where they're being developed, right? So it doesn't come as a surprise that a algorithm that's developed in Europe is probably really good at doing facial recognition on people who look like you and myself, right? In China, those algorithms are very good at recognizing people of Chinese. So there's what was happening was there was not a large data set of people from Africa and South America. So because there wasn't a lot of training data, the algorithms weren't getting the match rates that you would expect. Mm-hmm. So having a diverse data set is very important to train those algorithms. Just because in DHS we see all walks of life, all types of ethnicities. So you can't deploy something that would be only good for a certain segment of the population. Mm-hmm. So,
what do you do as far as a timeline for a program like this? How do you determine when you have all the data that you need, or when you have enough data that you can move forward, move to the next phase, anything like that?
So we try to get as much data as possible. We have the guardrails of privacy, civil rights, civil liberties, right? So we're working through those programs, and they will dictate how much data we can have and how long we can actually keep it. So we definitely work with them very closely because it's a data set that's rich in PII, and you don't want it to fall in the wrong hands. Mm-hmm.
How do you curate work like this? You mentioned the partners that you're working with that are outside the government. Mm-hmm. How do you curate those the work that you're doing to know, okay, we're ready for the next kind of building block in building this?
Right, so we'll take the algorithms that we use already, and then we will start using the thresholds that we have, and then we will actually run that data through, and so we can actually see the match rates, and so we can look and either adjust the threshold rates or see if we actually need more data so we can actually get better results. And we will inform our software providers, hey, you have a problem here, you have a problem here, you need to go back and fix this and train. So it's really a partnership. It's not just the government saying, hey, go do this. It's like we have this problem we found out, right? And now you need to fix this problem.
We have, I have this that I read from your team recently. The OBIM Futures Identity Team looks beyond the horizon from tomorrow to 30 years out to consider the new technologies and policies that will emerge in the realm of biometrics and identity management. What does the view beyond the horizon look like now? And given you've been in this field for a number of years now, how has that evolved over time?
So when I started in 2005, it was two prints, right? It was just fingerprints, right? And face was just taken, so you know, the Mark I eyeball, as they call it, right, would pass that test, right? And then we evolved into iris, right? And we've gone from DNA to rapid DNA, and we've looked at voice, right? And so some of the future things are looking at, you know, rapid DNA, right? Getting those costs down lower, actually accelerating the time it takes for those rapid DNA matches. They're now around an hour, right? So we can actually look at those, and it's not just for identification purposes, but for relational purposes as well. So you're talking about human trafficking, right? Are these children with this one individual, are they all related, or are they being trafficked? The only way you can really do that is through DNA, and so DNA is definitely on the horizon. Voice is another capability that's on the horizon. So you know, when you call your data center and they validate who you are, they're doing it by voice, right? So you know, for people like CIS who've got call centers, you call in, you wait for an operator to say, hey, my address has changed. Could you do that differently if you just validated yourself with your voice and say, change my address to X, Y, or Z?
We have about 30 seconds left.
Okay.
Who are some of your most important partners inside DHS? You mentioned CBP in the craniofacial work that you're doing. Who are some of the other organizations inside the agency that you work with?
DHS S&T, work closely with them. They have a test facility in Maryland, right? And so working with ICE as well. So they have a lot of facial recognition things that they use for their use cases. So the Secret Service. And we've actually been reached out to by FEMA. So, you know, disasters happen, and how do we do victim identification? So those are some of the big ones that we work with.
Will, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks for your time today.
Well, thank you.
You can read more about the program Will described on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today continues in a moment.
Here's Igor Yablokov, CEO and founder of Prion, from Innovation in Government at SoftWeek, presented by Carasoft.
I think one of the things that we foresaw is people don't trust technology, people trust other people. And so for many years we've been working at the intersection of artificial intelligence and knowledge management in order to reduce the distance between people and knowledge and each other as well. So to be able to take you know, some of the veteran ideas, lessons learned, and things of that sort, and to process them in such a way so that they can be easily discoverable and shareable with you know, peer organizations as well. That's one of the most exciting transformations that we've seen with this era of technology.
For more, go to innovationingov.com.
Welcome back. In today's event spotlight, U.S. Cyber Command and the Defense Information Systems Agency are the headliners again this year at AFCEA International's TechNet Cyber. It's coming this Tuesday through Thursday, June 25th to 27th at the Baltimore Convention Center. The speaker list includes General Timothy Hawk, the commander of U.S. Cyber Command and director of the NSA, the outgoing Pentagon CIO, John Sherman, and the director of DISA, Lieutenant General Robert Skinner. You can read more about TechNet Cyber and register at fedgovtoday.com/events. FedGov Today TV returns next Sunday morning at 10:30 with highlights from TechNet Cyber. I'm Francis Rose. I'll see you then. Thanks for watching. Have a great week.